Principal message of the book The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. Coming up, the laws of human nature delve into what motivates and drives people. These motivations can be conscious or not. We can all use these motives to better ourselves and the people around us, which is important. From Martin Luther King to Queen Elizabeth I, this book draws on the wisdom and examples of some of history's most significant figures. These observations combine to create advice applicable to everyone. About Robert Greene. Robert Greene is a well-known American author. His writings deal mainly with strategy, power, and seduction. As a student of Zen Buddhism, many of his reflections are based on concepts from this discipline. He is currently the author of 6 international bestsellers. Irrationality is an element of human behavior. It is often claimed that modern society is based on rationality and reason. However, the fact is that we make an excessive proportion of our decisions that are supported by emotional reactions. These emotional reactions have no relation to logic. Hence, as humans, we are very susceptible to making irrational decisions. This dilemma of seeking rationality and failing dates back to the 5th century BC. Robert Greene describes an Athenian statesman, Pericles, who is supposed to be one of the main people encouraging rational behavior. During this time, there were rumors that the Spartans were preparing to attack Athens. Pericles encouraged the leaders of Athens to indicate restraint instead of making the primary attack. If the leaders acted on their emotions, they could have started a full-fledged war. Soon after, Pericles kicked the bucket because of the plague. Without his rational vision, Athens based its decisions on emotions. Athens fought the Spartans and almost destroyed Athens. We can learn a lot from Pericles. Pericles showed patience. Patience is the key to creating decisions that support rationality rather than making quick decisions that support emotions. Pericles also considered all options when making decisions. He gathered all the facts and made informed decisions. This sometimes meant disagreeing with most individuals and people in power. However, it is more important that his decisions support logic and reason rather than being popular. In addition to the present, even when humans take the time to create a rational decision, there are still several biases that humans are vulnerable to when deciding. Confirmation bias, seeking information that supports ideas that we simply already have. Conviction bias, believing that our ideas are more likely to be true because we have stronger emotions about the subject matter. Appearance bias, whoever has an attractive appearance, either by looks or wealth, is automatically a decent person. In-group bias, automatically believing what our in-group believes. Robert does not recommend not having emotions. Instead, try to balance your thoughts along with your emotions, and give yourself time to make informed decisions that are primarily supported by evidence. Note, you like to imagine that you are in control of your destiny, consciously planning the course of your life in the best possible way. But you are unaware of how much your emotions dominate you. They make you lean toward ideas that soothe your ego. They make you look for evidence that confirms what you already want to believe. They make you see what you want to see, depending on your mood, and this disconnection from reality is the source of the bad decisions and negative patterns that haunt your life. Rationality is the ability to counteract these emotional effects, to think rather than react, to open your mind to what is really happening, as opposed to what you are feeling. It doesn't come naturally, it's a power we must cultivate, but in doing so we realize our greatest potential. Robert Greene. Accept people for who they are. As humans, we have a fetish for changing people. We are the biggest reason for trauma in other humans. We are always judging people and wishing they would become something they are not. However, the sooner we accept that we cannot change others, the happier we will be. Robert gives the example of old fogies who threaten their children with punishments to get them to comply. Punishments and threats will not change the problem child. Instead, they will teach the child a way to better avoid getting caught. If we accept that we are all different, we will be much less frustrated. Try to understand and accept people instead of trying to alter them. Try to understand their motives and what makes them who they are. Really listen to them after asking them about their motives, gathering as much information as possible. People love to talk about themselves, so this should not be difficult. After acquiring this information, you should stop to research it. Adopting these approaches will give you a better understanding of who this person is and how you can help them thrive. In addition, we should always try to use our empathy to gain greater recognition of the character of others. Using our empathy will help us to understand when people are wearing a mask in life. This can be a vital skill, as we will then try to help this individual to express themselves genuinely. We will better understand a person's true character by observing how they react to adversity. Note, our continued connection to social media makes us prone to new forms of viral emotional effects. They are not media designed for quiet reflection. With their constant presence, we have less and less mental space to step back and think. Robert Greene. Make an effort to be a stronger version of yourself. Robert explains that we all go through life wearing a mask. We always try to show the world the simplest part of ourselves, even if what we present is not accurate. This approach is inspired from an early age, as we do what our parents say to get certain benefits. This is how society works. Our society promotes teamwork and kindness. Therefore, presenting strong feelings about a particular or being selfish is frowned upon. Thus, these behaviors do not seem to be compromised by the fact that we dislike another individual or simply want the best for ourselves. Social media has made it even easier to create your character. Robert says we should always wear masks that show our best selves. If we all showed our true selves, the world would be a worse place. Also, putting on a persona helps protect us from our insecurities. It helps us wish that we already have what we would like, and believing it implies that you will soon become that person. We are myopic. Humans tend to react to obvious problems rather than those that have less impact on their daily lives. For example, more money is spent and more attention is paid to the fight against terrorism than to global climate change. This tendency has an evolutionary origin. Historically, humans had to specialize on immediate threats rather than on people who had the potential for greater impact. Robert Greene recommends that we adopt a forward-looking perception rather than our current myopic nature. We should always take a step back and look at potential options, as well as what the implications of neglecting a less obvious problem might be. One way to understand this may be that our current problems are often the result of earlier myopia. If we understand this moment, then we will more effectively prioritize the most critical problems. The arrogance behind success holds us back. We tend to become self-absorbed. Robert describes human beings as narcissistic by nature. People range from healthy levels of narcissism to deep narcissism. Those who are deeply narcissistic see others as extensions of themselves. Robert attributes this type of narcissism to people being too attached to a young child or not paying enough attention to the child. The former prevents the child from developing a personal identity, while the latter results in low self-esteem. Interestingly, deep narcissists lack the self-love that is often associated with narcissism. Therefore, Robert Greene suggests that creating a form of self that will love could be a great tool for creating healthier levels of narcissism. Robert Greene describes how success often goes to people's heads. This effect is called the law of greatness. An excellent example of the law of grandiosity is the career of Michael Eisner. Eisner became the CEO of Disney in the 1980s. During this time, he released 14 successful films. These films ended up reviving the struggling Disney brand. For Eisner, everything he touched turned to gold. However, when he turned his attention to theme parks and the construction of Euro Disney in France, this endeavor was less successful. Instead of accepting any blame, Eisner looked to others for responsibility. This was often because his ego had grown. In 1994, he shocked the industry by firing his subordinate Jeffrey Katzenberg. Jeffrey had been primarily responsible for many recent hits, such as The Lion King. In September 2005, board members ousted Eisner after Disney's stock prices began to fall. Often people experience success and forget how they achieved it. Success requires the support of others and mentors. Also, a degree of luck. Remembering these characteristics helps us to be realistic. We should not let our genders define what we can and cannot do. We all have a masculine side and a feminine side. Robert Greene suggests that we must always learn to unleash each side to become strong figures. Examples of influential celebrities, such as David Bowie, adopted a more feminine side to utilize all their strengths. An identical approach was taken by Caterina Sforza, an example Robert Greene gives during this book. Caterina was born into a strong Italian family. Dynasty in 1463. She enjoyed combat training, as well as fashion and the arts. Her ability to embrace both traditionally male and female hobbies led to her being considered a robust figure. Robert Greene explains in The Laws of Attribute that our views of masculinity and femininity are a product of our genes and our environment. However, if we learn to embrace both views, we will improve our relationships. Specifically, Robert explains how a person who embraces his or her feminine side is better able to empathize with women. Robert states that we should always aim to bring together the strengths of both men and women. Men tend to categorize things, while women explore for patterns and connections. A mix of these two approaches is good for problem solving. Don't conform to the herd mentality if it's dragging you down. Human beings tend to see themselves in relation to others. We spend an inordinate proportion of our time worrying about what others think and whether we fit into certain groups. A group mentality will be very beneficial, as teamwork helps keep everyone focused on a common goal. Despite the strengths related to group work, there are also multiple risks related to groups. First, after being among others, we behave differently. Our principles are lost within the group, these principles begin to imitate those of the group. Therefore, we lose what makes us unique, including our ability to think independently. In addition, Robert explains that being part of a gang can cause us to make more irrational decisions than we normally would. The first reason may be that we tend to do things simply because others do, rather than thinking logically about decisions. Consequently, one must be careful not to let oneself be dragged down by the group. Individuals with a weak character will find it more difficult to get out of the clutches of the group. Next, Robert Greene suggests that we avoid being dragged down by the group. 1. Maintain independence and rationality regardless of what others tell you. 2. Develop self-awareness. 3. Make sure you are focused in the moment every time you are in an overly crowded group. Use your weaknesses in a very positive way. One trait that is often considered a weakness is aggressiveness. Robert Greene states that we should always channel our aggressiveness in an extremely positive way. To this end, he gives the example of John D. Rockefeller in the 19th century. Rockefeller was in business with a person named Maurice Clark, but Maurice found Rockefeller irritating. Rockefeller was always pressuring Maurice to expand the business. Maurice found this so irritating that he sold his shares of the business at auction. Rockefeller bought these shares and turned his small business into a quality company. This is capable of becoming one of the most powerful companies ever created. The only way Rockefeller was able to turn this small company into a business that is still impactful today is by being a complicated aggressor. Our aggressiveness is what has made us the world's leading dominant species. Therefore, we should not always repress this aggressiveness. Repression ends in passive aggression. On the contrary, we should always accept our aggressiveness and where it comes from and use it to our advantage. For example, we can use this aggressive energy to be tenacious and fearless. The 18 Laws of Human Nature. The backbone of this book is the 18 laws that Robert Greene has identified. We have already considered the essential laws above, but now we will provide you with a concise summary of the 18 laws. Number 1. Irrationality. Irrationality is one of the most important human flaws. Irrationality is often driven by our emotions and causes us to see and seek evidence that matches our narrative. This disconnect from the reality of the world around us can cause us to make a series of bad decisions. Robert provided the example of Pericles, discussed earlier. As a rational man, Athens prospered. Overcoming irrationality. We must recognize our biases and also the triggers that lead us to make emotionally driven decisions. In addition, we must take a step back and give ourselves time to relax before making important decisions. Energy, combined with rational thinking, is the ideal balance. Number 2. Narcissism. We are all self-centered and crave the attention and approval of others. Robert gives the example of Stalin. Stalin was charming at first, but he was ruthless to anyone who challenged him. He was plagued by insecurities. Insecurities are the basis of narcissism. Overcoming narcissism. Cultivate empathy for others and avoid making hasty judgments without putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Learn as much as you can about others. Robert gives the example of Ernest Shackleton as a healthy narcissist. When his team was stranded for months in Antarctica in late 1915, Shackleton realized that his attitude would be the difference between life and death. He paid attention to individuals similarly because the group as a whole. This approach developed trust within the group, and everyone survived. Hashtag role-playing. People always represent emotions that are different from what they feel. We must understand how to identify people's genuine emotions. In addition, we learn how to present the most effective version of ourselves. How to play roles and understand the roles of others. Try to be more like Milton Erickson. Milton was a pioneer of hypnotherapy. After months of physical paralysis due to polio, Milton learned to better read physical cues. Physical signals are the most effective indicators of people's genuine feelings. Therefore, focus more on gestures, tones of voice, and small facial expressions. Also, learn how to interpret yourself by practicing how to show appropriate emotions in numerous circumstances. Number 4. Compulsive behavior. People will have a specific reputation or superficial image. However, these reputations are never a true reflection of that person's character. Robert uses the example of businessman Howard Robert Hughes. Howard appeared very successful and happy, but in reality he struggled with deep anxiety and control issues. Thus, he became dependent on painkillers. Number 5. Greed. We have to accept our circumstances and identify clear long-term visions. It is easy for humans to think that the grass is usually greener on the opposite side. Just a reference to your reality will bring you calm and focus. Robert gives the example of Coco Chanel. This French couturier achieved success because she understood that people want what they don't have. Therefore, she developed a degree of mystery around her work and her products. Number 6. Myopia. We are animals, which implies that we are most impressed by what we see and feel. We often forget to think about the implications of our actions or the big picture. However, a shortage of perspective can lead to negative repercussions. For example, people who invested in housing lost a lot of dollars during the housing bubble when it eventually burst. This is applicable to the case Robert provides, which is that of the shipping company. The company did not have long-term viability, but this did not stop people from investing in stocks, and therefore, the South Sea bubble eventually burst. How to overcome myopia? Try not to be overwhelmed by long-term information. Keep in mind the essential information to make decisions that will bring you long-term benefits. If you feel really overwhelmed by the amount of data relating to the long term, you will always delegate the work. Number 7. Defensiveness. We are all defensive about certain things. This approach limits our creative nature. Therefore, we should always be hospitable to new ideas and thoughts. If we receive a piece of constructive criticism, we should always take it as an opportunity to think differently. Robert gives the example of the President of the United States. Johnson was the 36th President of the U.S. He did not gain power by dominating people, instead, he gained it by letting others do the talking and be the celebrities of the show. Number 8. Self-sabotage. Human beings have a habit of realizing their greatest fears through self-sabotage. If we have long-term fear, we will see the negative in everything. This can unconsciously influence our decisions and lead to self-sabotage. Robert gives the example of the playwright. Anton was a Russian playwright who had a very hard childhood. Despite this, he avoided self-sabotage and decided to always turn the negative into a positive. How to stop self-sabotage? Adopting a hostile attitude will only cause you to see everything as a threat. You would like to do and develop an expansive attitude where you see yourself as an explorer. See adversity as a challenge and recognize that you simply have the skills and capabilities to craft your response. Number 9. Repression. We all repress our insecurities, aggressiveness, and selfish impulses. You can learn to manage this dark side of yourself and prevent it from seeping out. Identify and accept your tendency to project emotions or bad qualities onto those you recognize. Express these dark thoughts through a harmless avenue, for example, art. Robert gives the example of Richard M. Nixon, the 37th President of the United States. Although he always had a positive image in public, he repressed his angry tendencies, and his true personality was exposed after the scandal. Number 10. Envy. Human beings naturally compare themselves with others. However, envy is not socially acceptable. We must become aware of our envy before it becomes dangerous. Envy is natural, and this suggests that we cannot eradicate it completely. However, we can turn it into something more positive. Turn envy into emulation. Use your envy to motivate yourself to push forward. Robert provides the example of the author. Mary was the author of Frankenstein, however, she was betrayed by her envious friend. Number 11. Greatness. Extreme grandiosity can mean that we lose our concept of reality. You will identify grandiosity in yourself or others by observing behaviors such as exaggerated certainty of success, excessive touchiness when criticized, and disregard for authority. We will turn our grandiosity into practical grandiosity. Practical grandiosity involves channeling our energy towards solving problems and improving relationships. As mentioned earlier, Robert uses the example of Michael Eisner to talk about grandiosity. The former CEO of Disney attributed all of Disney's previous success to himself, which led him to isolate himself and ultimately fail. Number 12. Gender rigidity. There are strengths of feminine and masculine characteristics for different circumstances. Therefore, we should always try to use both our masculine and feminine sides. Again, Robert's example of gender rigidity has already been discussed. Caterina Sforza was a noble woman admired for using both her feminine and masculine qualities. Number 13. Aimless. We can be pulled in many directions by our emotions and, therefore, by the opinions of others. This can result in an absence of direction in our lives. Some people love change, while others are afraid of chaos. However, we should all always develop a purpose and use it to thrive throughout our lives, regardless of change. Theologian King Jr. might be a good example of someone who used dissent to help him overcome failures. He used nonviolence and direct action to promote civil rights. Number 14. Compliance. We all want to adapt. However, this will cause us to behave in a way that we do not necessarily believe. To overcome this, we have to develop a form of self-awareness. Robert describes how Gao Yuan's book, Born Red, shows how people behave emotionally. As a result, people often lack the nuanced thinking and analysis required to excel. Number 15. Inconsistency. We all seek to follow powerful people. However, this implies that we tend to turn our backs on people as soon as they weaken. Therefore, to lead effectively, we need to convey a sense of power, legitimacy, and fairness. Doing this can help people trust you more. Robert gives the example of Elizabeth I as someone who was not fickle. She had to constantly prove that she was the leader of the country, so she didn't rely on her royal blood to try. Instead, she led by example. Number 16. Aggression. We all have stressors and frustrations in our daily lives. Occasionally these can become an excessive amount, and we exhibit aggressive behaviors. We need to find out the signs that indicate aggressive individuals. There are a few ways to overcome aggressiveness. First, you'll be able to mirror their behavior. Alternatively, if the individual is constantly aggressive towards you, sometimes it is best to separate yourself from this person. This may involve quitting your job if the aggressive person is your boss. Robert gives the example of John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller became one of the richest people in U.S. history and supported his aggressive strategies to gain power and control. However, he used his aggressiveness productively rather than destructively. Number 17. Generational myopia. Generations always want to separate themselves from the previous generation. Each new generation wants to vary the globe. Try to be more aware of the common traits you just shared with other generations. Also, try to reflect on things from the perspective of other generations. Robert gives the example of King Louis XVI of France. He was not in tune with his generation, and this led him to become a victim of revolution. Note right now, you are living on the fruits of countless people from the past who have made your life incomparably easier through their struggles and inventions. Has benefited from an education that embodies the wisdom of thousands of years of experience. It's very easy to demand all this with a pinch of salt, to imagine that everything came about naturally, and that he has the right to possess all these powers. That is the vision of spoiled children, and any sign of such an attitude should be seen in as shameful. This world needs constant improvement and renewal. You're not here just to satisfy your urges and consume what you want to consume. Others have done, but also to form and contribute to serve a better purpose. Robert Greene. Number 18. Denial of death. We try to avoid considering death. However, we should always ask ourselves about death. Awareness of our mortality gives our life goals greater purpose. Robert gives the example of Mary Flannery O'Connor. Mary was an American novelist who was diagnosed with lupus at age 27. This diagnosis gave her a form of urgency that helped her to overcome her life's struggles and deepen her understanding of the world. Thanks.